In just 36 seconds, Jasmine Crockett shattered the First Lady's composure on live Capitol Hill audio. What she exposed wasn't just scandal, it smelled like espionage buried in 4 international trips, 3 encrypted logs, and one name the White House never wanted said aloud. Behind closed doors, national security and personal betrayal collided, and Jasmine refused to blink. If one man could get that close to Melania Trump without clearance, how many more already have? This is a story worth every second of your time. It was 11:38 p.m. when the encrypted alert blinked on Jasmine Crockett's secure tablet, subtle silent meant to go unnoticed. She was still in her Escalade engine, humming outside the Capitol, the night heavy with post-hearing exhaustion. The vehicle's windows were dark, but the glow of her screen cut through with a single subject line. They lied about the First Lady's trips. Check the logs. No sender name. Just a scrambled string of characters with a Swiss domain and a red flag security seal. Jasmine's thumb hovered. Opening it could mean risking exposure. Ignoring it could mean missing the one truth no one else dared to chase. Her heartbeat slowed not from fear, but from calculation. She'd spent years wading through redacted briefings and hollow testimony on cyber intrusions, watched whistleblowers destroyed for being 5 seconds too brave. The system didn't punish dishonesty, it punished curiosity. But Jasmine Crockett didn't build her reputation in the comfort of silence. With a quick breath, she tapped open the message. No text, no context. Just a zip file labeled FTL Restricted Access Logs, 01 zip, in a single line. If you read this, you'll understand why I had to stay anonymous. The name you're looking for appears 4 times. Begin with Brussels. The rest of the ride was a blur. Jasmine didn't unzip the file until she was home in Arlington, curtains drawn, lights. Low phone powered off. She sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open like a crime scene. Her finger hovered one last time. This could be a deepfake. A setup, she whispered to herself. Or a damn good reason someone wants me scared. Then she clicked. The screen filled with cascading rows of internal White House scheduling data. It wasn't a leak, it was a confession. Time-stamped flight logs, staff rosters, security details, payment methods. Every entry meticulously detailed, far beyond what the press ever saw. Jasmine had viewed this kind of material before years ago, while working on a subcommittee report about executive travel abuses. But even then, everything had been redacted, blurred, sanitized. These files were raw, clean, dangerous. Her eyes scanned the screen. One field stood out: unscheduled liaison. Cross-ref ID. There were dozens of empty entries, except 4. 4 trips logged under FLOTUS M. Trump had a name beside them. Not a translator, not a chef, not a diplomatic staffer. Just one name repeated in silent defiance of security protocol: Dragan Petrovich. The moment she saw it, her chest tightened. Not from recognition, she had no idea who he was, but from the way his name refused to vanish. Like a thumbprint left on glass. Brussels, Geneva, Berlin, Prague. And each time a gap in the Secret Service logs just wide enough for a ghost to slip through. Jasmine sat back. The silence in her apartment felt louder than any protest. The weight of the information crashed over her like a slow wave. This wasn't a technical error. It wasn't clerical oversight. It was intentional, calculated, and someone wanted her to see it. She grabbed her phone and opened a secure line. "Julius," she whispered, voice low but urgent. "I need you to call in a favor." Quietly. "Rufus Kane, the NSA guy who helped us crack the voter suppression algorithm in Georgia. Tell him I have something. And it's not politics, it's national security." She stayed up until 3:00 a.m., printing the logs, highlighting routes, cross-referencing timestamps against news events. Policy shifts, foreign deals, closed-door meetings. Patterns emerged like bruises under fluorescent light. On one trip, Melania landed during an EU art auction known for laundering assets. On another, a sudden reversal in luxury tariffs occurred within 24 hours of her return. And always Petrovich. The question wasn't just who he was. The real question screamed louder in Jasmine's mind as the sun began to rise over D.C. How does a man with no clearance get this close to the First Lady repeatedly and leave no digital fingerprint behind? Then came the question that made her spine stiffen and her breath freeze. What if this wasn't a leak, but an invitation? The moment Jasmine Crockett locked the door behind her, The quiet of her Arlington apartment turned hostile. It wasn't peaceful. It was charged, the kind of silence that follows a storm you didn't see coming. The folder was still warm in her hands from where it had rested in her lap, the whole ride home like a live wire she didn't dare set down. She placed it gently on her kitchen table, cleared the space with one sweeping arm, and stared at it like it might explode. Outside, the city exhaled under the weight of midnight. Inside, Jasmine's pulse drummed against her ribs like a warning. She sat, reached for her secure laptop, and opened the folder again, slowly, precisely like a surgeon, revealing an open wound. The logs weren't just detailed. They were surgical timestamps down to the second payment methods, travel clearances, even back-end system codes only seen by internal operators. These weren't screenshots. These were pulled straight from the White House's secure scheduling network. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, then paused. Something wasn't adding up. This wasn't just a breach. It was an offering, a breadcrumb trail left in her path on purpose. Jasmine pulled out a separate phone from the back of a locked drawer, military-grade, blacked out, untraceable. Only one number was saved. She typed 3 numbers and pressed send. A long beat. Then a reply flashed, Safe House 2. Come alone. By 12:30 a.m., Jasmine stood outside a narrow brick townhouse in Bethesda. No doorbell, no lights, just a single flicker from the second-story window. She knocked twice, paused, knock, and the door opened a crack. Inside, Rufus Kane waited, still wearing the same threadbare hoodie he'd worn back when they exposed voter suppression algorithms together. Former NSA current digital ghost, and one of the few people she trusted to look at a document without asking the wrong questions. He didn't say hello. Just took the folder and moved straight to his workstation, a jungle of wires, duct tape, and screens flickering in terminal green. Jasmine stood in the shadows, arms folded, eyes scanning the wall, where world clocks blinked above maps pinned with thread and tape. This wasn't paranoia, it was infrastructure. Rufus flipped through the first 5 pages, then paused. Where the hell did you get this? He muttered. It found me, Jasmine replied. Encrypted message, Swiss domain, no text, just this. He plugged in a thumb drive, dragged the files into his analyzer. The screen went dark for half a beat, then exploded in layers of internal tags, server trails, IP reroutes, access clearances. This isn't a leak, Rufus said slowly. These weren't copied. They were extracted root-level access. Whoever did this bypassed even Secret Service audit trails. Jasmine stepped closer. Can you trace where it started? He nodded once, then pointed. A blinking string appeared on the screen. AVX04 main DEOB 211. Her stomach dropped. That's Eisenhower Executive Office Building. Level 4 terminal, Rufus confirmed. You know how close that is to the East Wing? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Rufus leaned back in his chair, rubbing the side of his temple like he was trying to erase what he'd just seen. You're not looking at a passive info dump. This is targeted, directed. Someone with clearance wanted this out and wanted you to see it. Jasmine's mind raced, but her face stayed cold. Then either they think I'll bury it, or they want me to take the fall. He looked at her, or both. She picked up the folder again, heavier now, with the weight of what it meant. Not just surveillance gaps, not just logs. This was intentional exposure of something and someone the government had gone out of its way to keep off-grid. She turned toward the door, her voice low. Keep the drive. Clone it. Deep encrypt the root metadata. I need to know who touched this before me. Rufus nodded. You're playing with fire, Jasmine. She opened the door, eyes already narrowing. Then it's time we see who lit the match. But one question still clawed at her ribs as she stepped back into the dark. Who inside the East Wing had both the clearance and the motive to blow it all wide open? The sun hadn't yet broken over the Potomac, but Jasmine Crockett was already wide awake, standing barefoot in her living room, surrounded by open folders, sticky notes, and an oversized map littered with pins and timestamps. Her apartment looked less like a congresswoman's sanctuary and more like a war room, and in many ways that's exactly what it had become. The Petrovich files were spread across the floor like a classified crime scene, each piece more damning than the last. Every redacted name, every manipulated log entry, every flight path that diverged from official records whispered the same warning: someone wanted this hidden. But the louder question was pounding in her chest. Why show her? Why now? She stood motionless, hands clenched at her sides, staring at the line Rufus had underlined before he left AVX4 main, Dr. Eob 211. Whoever that was, they weren't just leaking, they were choosing their messenger. And Jasmine Crockett had just been chosen to either blow the doors off the East Wing or seal them shut forever. She moved to the window. Outside, D.C. was still cloaked in early morning quiet, but she could feel the city pulsing, as if something in its bloodstream was preparing to erupt. Her phone buzzed on the table. Julius, 2 missed calls. A text Hill Security requested metadata on your personal calendar. Unusual. Jasmine didn't respond. She knew what that meant. Eyes were already turning her way. She sat down on the edge of the couch, elbows on her knees, and let the silence wrap around her. For a moment it was tempting, the thought of deleting it all, calling it fake, telling herself she had no obligation to go further. No subpoena, no public statement. She could walk away. No headlines, no target on her back, no war with the most powerful office in the country. But deep down, she knew the path was a lie. She didn't run for office to play safe. She didn't survive racist smear campaigns, brutal elections, and backroom betrayals to flinch at the first sign of fire. She had stood in hearings where truth was treated like a liability, where integrity was a punchline. But never once had she looked away. Not now. Jasmine stood and pulled out the black leather folder, the one Rufus had helped secure with biometric lock. Inside were the hard copies, the timeline overlays, and a backup drive encrypted with military-grade layers. She placed it on the dining table and stared at it like a loaded weapon. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a choice. Expose the rot or let it fester. Her chest tightened as she reached for her tablet. One by one, she began scheduling off-the-record briefings, select aides, 2 legal consultants, and a cybersecurity liaison from a neutral federal agency. She didn't trust the official pipeline, not yet. This wasn't about starting a media circus. It was about threading the needle of legality, just tight enough to get through the next 48 hours without being silenced or worse. She drafted her talking points carefully. No accusations, no theater, just patterns. Questions, data. Her breath steadied with each line she typed, like laying out a chessboard where the king was already compromised and the pawns didn't know they were being watched. By mid-morning, she was in full motion: call logs, secured backup documents stored in 2 separate encrypted clouds, 1 press contact placed on hold just in case. She knew how the game worked. Control the timing, control the story. Lose it, and they'll write you as hysterical before the truth ever sees daylight. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was how deep the counterforce would strike once she stepped into that hearing room. Still, Jasmine Crockett wasn't preparing to win. She was preparing to survive the fire long enough to light someone else's match. The real question wasn't whether she could speak. It was whether they would let her finish before cutting the mic. The Rayburn House office building felt colder than usual. Room 2172, deep in the basement, was sealed tight. No cameras, no reporters, no transcripts. Just the hum of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, and the thick silence of men who didn't expect to be challenged. Jasmine Crockett sat 3rd chair from the left blazer, crisp hands folded neatly over a black leather case that had not left her side in 72 hours. She didn't fidget. She didn't glance at her notes. Every word she was about to say had already been rehearsed twice in her office, once in the car, and countless times in her mind. Chairman Lowell Nash, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, tapped the gavel once softly but enough to cut the air. We're here to address anomalies in executive travel protocol. Representative Crockett, your written concerns were received. You have the floor. Jasmine didn't rise. She cleared her throat, voice even. Thank you, Chairman. My review began with standard audit trails from White House scheduling logs. What I found wasn't standard. It was coordinated off-calendar activity involving the First Lady's travel abroad, specifically Brussels, Prague, Geneva, and Berlin. In each case, there were discrepancies in manifest data, missing Secret Service records, and unlisted personnel proximity. A subtle shift echoed across the room, just enough to notice. One liaison straightened in his chair. Another froze mid-note. She continued. These weren't clerical oversights. They were consistent. 4 trips, 4 gaps, each overlapping with the presence of one man, Dragan Petrovich. The name landed like a dropped glass. Reppers Steele seated 2 chairs to her right, raised an eyebrow, and leaned back slowly, his smirk a mask that didn't reach his eyes. Are we now entertaining tabloid rumors, he asked, lips curling with practiced contempt. The First Lady's choice of company abroad is hardly the jurisdiction of national security. Jasmine didn't flinch. This isn't about company, it's about protocol. Petrovich is not cleared personnel. He holds no diplomatic role, and yet his name flagged in 3 separate Interpol databases appears adjacent to the First Lady's movements. Not once, 4 times. Same hotels, same arrival windows, no surveillance logs, no escort trails. That's not a coincidence. That's a breach. A long pause. The 2 White House liaisons exchanged glances. One leaned toward the microphone. Representative Crockett, were these documents obtained through proper channels? No, Jasmine replied without apology. They were leaked. I verified their authenticity with independent cybersecurity experts. What matters is not how they came to me, but why no one in this room noticed them first. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Nash leaned forward, his voice lower, careful. Are you suggesting the First Lady is complicit in a national security breach? I'm saying the pattern requires oversight, Jasmine said. And if we ignore the red flags because they make us uncomfortable, then we're no longer protecting the country. We're protecting an illusion. The air turned sharp. Jasmine could feel it, eyes narrowing, alliances, shifting someone's hand, tightening around a pen that would later be used to draft retaliation. But she stayed still, unwavering, letting the silence hold like a wire pulled taut. And then finally she spoke the name again, on record without flinching. Dragan Petrovich. That is the individual whose presence surrounds these anomalies. If this were any other civilian, we would already have a closed session investigation. But because it involves proximity to the First Lady, we hesitate. Why? No one answered. Jasmine looked around the room, calm, unshaken, but burning underneath. How does a chamber built for oversight respond when the truth walks in, wearing the wrong name? The silence after Jasmine Crockett spoke wasn't just uncomfortable, it was loaded, humming with electricity and veiled panic. For 5 full seconds, no one moved. Then the older of the 2 White House liaisons, a man whose lapel pin quietly screamed clearance, level 6, leaned toward the committee microphone and muttered something to his colleague. The second liaison's hand went instantly to her earpiece, fingers trembling. Whatever was whispered wasn't protocol. It was damage control. Chairman Nash narrowed his eyes. This hearing is now subject to procedural review, he said, tapping the gavel once sharp. All non-essential personnel will vacate the chamber. Committee members remain. The room shifted like a fault line cracking. 2 aides in the back exchanged glances before hurrying out. The doors closed behind them with a heavy metallic finality. Jasmine didn't move. She felt the change immediately, not in temperature, but in the air itself. This wasn't oversight anymore. This was exposure, and the room knew it. Nash's voice dropped, more personal now. Representative Crockett, are you aware of the implications of what you've introduced? I am, she said flatly. That name, Petrovich, do you understand the diplomatic consequences of placing it beside the First Lady's? I understand that if I hadn't, no one else would have, Jasmine replied. Her voice didn't rise. That made it more dangerous. We've built a culture of convenient silence. I'm just tired of pretending we don't see the cracks. A beat. Then a paper rustled, Reppers Steele, ever the agitator, unfolding a pre-printed memo. He slid it across the table toward Nash. This is from the East Wing, drafted this morning, just in case Miss Crockett went off script. He didn't hide the condescension. They deny knowing anyone by that name. Never met, never briefed, never logged. Jasmine stared at the memo, then explained the travel logs, the overlapping locations, the security gaps, the receipts, the hotel entries with payment linked to a company flagged in a Swiss anti-fraud database. Deny that too, Steele leaned back, arms crossed, a grin flickering. You're walking the edge between inquiry and slander, Congresswoman. No, she said, eyes locking with his. I'm standing exactly where the truth lives. And it's not in the hallway. The chairman exhaled through his nose slowly. Then he stood. This session is now moved to restricted legal review, he said louder now. All remaining attendees, White House liaisons included, are dismissed until further notice. Representative Crockett, stay behind. The liaisons didn't argue. They stood stiffly, lips sealed, and exited without a glance back. When the door clicked shut, Nash looked straight at her. You're threading a needle that may break your entire career. They'll come for you, ethics, clearance, credibility. If you're wrong... I'm not, Jasmine interrupted. He studied her. The room, though nearly empty, felt like a minefield. Then he said it. If this goes public before we verify the logs, it won't be Petrovich who gets buried. It'll be you. She didn't blink. Then dig deep. Because if we let this die in redacted footnotes, we become the lie. Outside that chamber, phones were already vibrating. Calls from White House counsel, early whispers to Hill leadership emails flagged urgent in inboxes Jasmine wasn't even supposed to know existed. The machine was waking up, and it was looking for a name to chew. But Jasmine Crockett had already made peace with consequence. She wasn't here to be palatable. She was here to be unignorable. The only question left was this: would the walls bend to truth or break to silence, trying to contain it? By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped back into her office on the Hill, the walls already felt tighter. The air was thick with something unspoken, the kind of tension that lives just beneath fluorescent lights and polished floors. Staffers looked up when she entered, some with curiosity, others with unease. They had heard whispers, not the whole story. Just fragments, the kind that traveled faster than facts. Jasmine said nothing. She moved with purpose, folder in hand, eyes locked forward. Inside her chief of staff, Lionel was waiting, tie undone tablet glowing with flagged messages from leadership. 3 calls from House counsel, he said without looking up, and 2 from ethics routine, they said. Right. Jasmine dropped the folder on the table like a gavel. Set up a secure briefing. Now, I want legal cybersecurity and 1 rep from intelligence, and no one leaks a word until I speak. Lionel blinked. You're not going to wait for clearance, no, she said, because if I wait, they bury it. 30 minutes later, a quiet war council formed behind closed doors. Her general counsel, Ruth Tannis, stoic, razor-brained, sat at the head of the table. The cybersecurity expert Malik Grant, fresh from a whistleblower protection nonprofit, scrolled through screenshots Jasmine had printed and annotated by hand. 3 aides stood near the door, notebooks, open eyes scanning for every dropped syllable that might become testimony. Jasmine paced. She didn't speak like a politician now. She spoke like someone who knew what silence could cost. This isn't about infidelity. This isn't scandal bait. This is strategic, deliberate circumvention of executive travel oversight. A foreign national flagged by Interpol crossed into secure proximity with the First Lady multiple times with no documentation, no clearance, and no explanation. If this were anyone else, we'd be in a classified hearing already. But it's not. So we stall, we spin, we sanitize. Not this time. The room fell silent. Ruth finally looked up. You're saying we skip internal review. I'm saying we file under Title 50, Jasmine said. The aides flinched. Ruth raised an eyebrow. That opens the door to public record. You realize that, right? If they push back, it leaks. Fast. Jasmine nodded. Let it. If the White House wants to challenge national security procedure on record, let them do it on the floor, not behind tinted glass. For a moment, no one spoke. Malik tapped on his screen, then turned it to show the group. I finished the trace. The packet routing confirms it. Eisenhower Building, internal access point. We're not just looking at a breach. We're looking at someone with proximity to the executive residence. Someone with intent. Which means this didn't come from outside, Jasmine said quietly. It came from the inside, high level and careful. The emotion in the room shifted, caution, bleeding into clarity. Jasmine wasn't here to survive headlines. She was here to blow the smoke off the machinery before it crushed someone else. But even as her team aligned behind her, the stakes rose with every passing second. Title 50 wasn't a whisper move. It was a flare in the dark. Ruth leaned forward. If you do this, you won't just be challenging the administration. You'll be daring them to come after you. Jasmine stared at her unflinching. Then let them come. But they're going to have to do it in daylight. At 4:37 p.m., the request was filed, digitally signed, encrypted, routed through congressional security. It would land on 2 desks by morning, one at the Intelligence Committee, one at Oversight. Jasmine closed her laptop and stood. The sun outside was beginning to bleed over the city, orange and low, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The fuse was lit. Now the only question was, would it reach the truth before the explosion reached her? The moment Jasmine clicked send, the room felt colder, as if the air itself had turned to glass. The Title 50 request, encrypted and tagged for urgent internal routing, vanished into the secured congressional system with a single flash. Too quiet, too easy, too irreversible. She stared at the screen, not blinking, heart steady, but her fingers refused to move for a few seconds longer. What she had just triggered wasn't policy. It was pressure, quiet pressure, the kind that creeps under doors and doesn't knock. Outside her window, the Capitol dome sat frozen in the evening haze, bathed in soft gold, like it didn't know the storm coming. Jasmine leaned back slowly, pulse low, but present, like the thrum of something ancient waiting to be disturbed. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt surgical. This wasn't about noise. It was about precision. The logs, the metadata, the cross-reference names, all of it was now in the hands of people who had spent years avoiding this exact type of evidence. By morning, the shift began, not loud, not chaotic, but precise in its eeriness. Her aides arrived to find subtle flags on their emails. One press staffer was asked off the record whether Jasmine planned to reframe her position. In committee corridors, hallway greetings were clipped too polite. A staffer for the speaker made accidental eye contact and turned too quickly. Jasmine said nothing. She watched. But it wasn't just the Hill that twitched. Outside the chamber, political blogs started to light up cryptic headlines with no sources, just implication. Foreign agent, what Congress isn't saying about a leaked file. Another insider raises travel flags tied to East Wing, unnamed but heard. They didn't name her. Not yet. But she knew their game. Float the story, measure the silence, then choose a side. Still, what struck her most wasn't the blogs, it was the vacuum. The major networks, the blue-check pundits, the legacy outlets, silent. Not a whisper. Not even a no comment. They were sitting on it, and that silence was deafening. She walked into her office, midday coffee in one hand, a manila envelope in the other, only to find Lionel pacing phone in one hand, panic in both eyes. We've got 3 separate background requests from CNN, Politico, and AP, all asking whether you plan to comment on something they say they haven't heard yet. He paused. They're pretending not to know, but they're probing. Jasmine set the coffee down. And we're not biting. Lionel hesitated. But why the silence from the top? If they know the leak is real, why not kill it now? She looked out the window again. Because they're waiting to see if it burns out. They're watching their own fire through glass, hoping someone else will put it out first. That was the truth under the spin. These outlets didn't miss the story. They were avoiding it. The proximity to power made them flinch. She wasn't just holding evidence. She was holding risk, and no one wanted to touch it until they were sure it couldn't stain them too. She moved back to her desk and opened a secure line to the Judiciary Subcommittee. If the press wouldn't move, the next fire would have to come from inside the building. The message she typed was short, clinical, designed to move under radar, FLOTUS travel inconsistencies. Requesting internal ethics triage coordination materials submitted under Title 50. Time-stamped authentication available upon review. JC, send, close, breathe. The game wasn't about proving she was right anymore. It was about daring them to act like she was wrong. And as the silence stretched on, Jasmine asked herself the only question that mattered if the truth is loud enough behind closed doors. Why does no one outside want to hear it? It hit just after noon. A sudden flurry of reporters outside the West Wing, a hastily arranged press briefing no one had on the schedule, and a podium flanked by flags that didn't wave. They waited. Then came Shelby Brandt, the president's press secretary, cool as glass, voice sharp enough to cut. No names were spoken. No titles were invoked, but every word had a target. There is absolutely no basis, she said slowly, carefully, for the reckless speculation circulating about the First Lady's international travel. All such trips were cleared, documented, and aligned with diplomatic protocols. Any implication to the contrary is irresponsible, partisan, and unworthy of serious consideration. Not false, not fabricated, just reckless. Jasmine watched the feed from her office in silence, arms, folded lips pressed into a hard line. She could hear the defense beneath the denial, not a full shield, but a smokescreen thick enough to fog the truth. Shelby Brandt didn't refute the logs. She avoided them, didn't dismiss the pattern. She ignored it. That kind of dodge wasn't accidental. It was tactical. Within the hour, whispers turned to orders. 3 staffers in the Capitol forwarded internal memos, her way unsigned but unmistakably White House in tone. No mention of Petrovich in official correspondence. Remove from calendar annotations immediately. All external travel notes to be routed through legal for final review. It wasn't cleanup, it was erasure. Jasmine moved through her hallway like a storm front, quiet, measured, unreadable. Some aides smiled nervously, others avoided her entirely. A few, the brave ones, nodded. They'd seen the memo. They knew what this meant. Their scared Lionel said, walking beside her phone buzzing in his hand. They won't say his name, won't touch the logs. They're rewriting their silence into policy. Jasmine didn't smile. Good. That means it landed. She wasn't here for noise. She wasn't chasing headlines. The story was out, but it wasn't a fire yet. That's what frustrated the machine. Jasmine hadn't given them a spectacle. She'd handed them a system failure dressed in footnotes, and they didn't know how to kill something that didn't scream. She returned to her office, closed the door, and sat at her desk. Outside the window, cameras flashed from across the avenue, journalists grasping for a reaction, a quote, a slip they could package into a breaking headline. But Jasmine gave them nothing. She had already delivered what mattered. Now she was watching who blinked first. On her tablet, a single sentence pulsed in her notes from the press briefing, reckless speculation. She highlighted it. Not inaccurate, not defamatory, just inconvenient. That was the tell. And in a building obsessed with power and performance, Jasmine knew what it meant when they refused to call a thing false. It meant they were praying no one asked why it might be true. The building didn't turn on her. All at once it leaned. Like a wall shifting just a few degrees off center, enough to make the ceiling feel lower, the floor uneven. Jasmine felt it first in the quiet hesitations, the late email replies from staffers who used to answer in seconds. Then in the meetings, colleagues who used to clap her back now avoided her gaze, offered half smiles that faded before reaching their eyes. No one said it aloud, but she knew what they were thinking. She went too far. By Thursday, the pressure was no longer polite. A senior party strategist pulled her aside in the hallway with the warmth of a dentist. Look, Jasmine, we admire your courage, but this thing is spiraling. You're making waves in the wrong direction. There's an election cycle ahead. Don't give the other side a sledgehammer. She didn't answer, not because she didn't care, but because the second she showed fear, they'd call it doubt. The real blow came quietly. 2 major donors froze their next round of commitments. One staffer from Oversight suggested she pause public statements for optics. And then came the ethics warning, dressed up in neutral language but unmistakably sharp. Improper handling of classified material may result in review by the Office of Congressional Conduct. Jasmine read the memo twice, then slid it into the drawer beneath her desk without a word. They weren't warning her. They were testing her. Lionel paced the office like a cage animal. This is coordinated, he hissed. They're not denying the data. They're denying you. If you step wrong, they'll shred you. Jasmine didn't look up. Then we stepped right. She felt the isolation growing, not the kind that comes from abandonment, but the kind that reveals the landscape. It showed her who leaned in and who disappeared. One congresswoman, once a close ally, gave her a tight smile on the House floor and said under her breath, "Be careful. You're not bulletproof." Jasmine didn't flinch. Neither are lies. That night, as the Capitol lights burned late, her phone buzzed with a restricted signal. Encrypted. Familiar. It was the contact from Homeland Security, someone she'd trusted once back during the Hurricane Maria investigation. The message was short, just 17 words. Petrovich passed through Dallas last month. Diplomatic exemption, executive clearance. DHS scrubbed the record, full wipe. She stared at the screen, breath gone. That wasn't just a leak. That was a hand pulling him through the firewall. Executive privilege wasn't a loophole. It was a shield, and someone high up was holding it over Petrovich like a royal pardon in plain sight. Jasmine's chest tightened, not in fear but in fury. They weren't just covering tracks. They were building a road for him. She set the phone down gently, but the storm inside her was already roaring. If even the gatekeepers were bending the rules to let him in, who inside this machine could she trust at all? When power shields privilege, what happens to those who still believe in consequence? The war room was silent, save for the low whir of processors and the scratch of a dry pen against paper. Jasmine sat at the center table, sleeves rolled to her elbows, eyes fixed on the map they had pinned across the wall. Red strings, sticky notes, and printouts covered 4 countries: Brussels, Berlin, Prague, Geneva, each with timestamps, hotel receipts, and flight manifests. Rufus stood to her right, dragging lines between events on his tablet, the glow of the data painting his face with urgency. "This isn't coincidence," he muttered, voice tight. "This is choreography." They had matched the logs against public records, cross-checked Melania Trump's travel windows against obscure diplomatic events and sudden shifts in U.S. policy. One by one, the dots connected, and what emerged wasn't just proximity, it was strategy. In Geneva, 3 days after her unscheduled stay at the Hotel du Lac, where Petrovich was logged in under a private art consulting firm, the White House abruptly reversed course on a luxury goods tariff, targeting Eastern European intermediaries. There was no press release, no legislative trail, just a line buried in a revision memo that passed without a single committee debate. In Berlin, she was listed under a private wellness retreat, yet the same 48-hour window aligned with a quiet softening of export restrictions on fine art transactions, previously tightened due to laundering concerns. Jasmine ran her fingers down the paper, each entry like a bruise she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just diplomacy veiled in privilege. It was manipulation of infrastructure disguised as routine travel. "Every trip touches something," she said aloud. "Policy doesn't shift like this without influence. Someone's feeding him intel, and he's feeding it back into the system." Rufus nodded grimly. "And no one's logging it because they're not seeing it as a breach. They're seeing it as an absence. That's the brilliance of it. Petrovich doesn't leave fingerprints. He leaves voids." Jasmine stood heart-pounding, but her voice calm. "Void of security logs, void of press coverage, void of surveillance, but filled with intent." She pointed to the Geneva entry. This wasn't an accident. That tariff reversal, it didn't come from Treasury, it came from executive policy, and someone had to benefit. Rufus pulled up a digital snapshot, a corporate beneficiary list from the Swiss revisions. One of the firms shell-linked, Vienna-based. Petrovich's name wasn't on it, but his handwriting might as well have been. Her stomach tightened, but it wasn't fear this time. It was certainty. This wasn't about romance. It wasn't even just espionage. It was access weaponized. She leaned over the table, both palms flat against wood. "This isn't about scandal. This is about a man walking through locked doors because someone keeps handing him the key." She stepped back, breath sharp. What kind of power meets behind velvet curtains, smiles in candlelit rooms, and comes back with a signature that shifts national law? What kind of democracy allows that? The file came wrapped in silence. No courier, no traceable sender, just a plain manila envelope slid under Jasmine's office door, sometime between dusk and night. The return address was nothing the label typed in: Courier Sans ESD non-official copy. Inside one page, thin paper, sharp weight. She read it once standing, then again seated. The third time she didn't blink once. It was a classified memorandum from a European military attaché, intercepted and translated into English by someone who clearly wanted her to see it. The heading read, "Prague observed, contact American diplomatic spouse." What followed was surgical. Unscheduled arrival noted at private gallery entrance north wing. American female identified via biometric markers matched to known spouse of U.S. executive leadership. Accompanied by male of Serbian origin flagged in Interpol watch list. No entourage, no press. Meeting lasted 92 minutes. Tone informal, content unrecorded. Departed separately. No follow-up logged through U.S. diplomatic channels. Jasmine dropped the page onto the desk like it had burned her fingers. For a moment, all she could hear was the pounding of blood in her ears. It was real. It had always been real. She wasn't chasing shadows. She wasn't hallucinating patterns. Foreign intelligence had eyes on Melania Trump, and they'd watched her meet Petrovich alone, off record, without protection. She turned to Lionel, who had just entered the room. They saw it. They logged it. But no one here raised a red flag. Why? Lionel scanned the memo, eyes widening with every line. This confirms it. EU Defense flagged him a year ago. But why didn't we get this? Why didn't intelligence brief you? Because someone buried it, Jasmine snapped. They let it die overseas. This wasn't just oversight. It was erasure with purpose. U.S. intelligence hadn't missed this. They had stepped over it like it was trash on the sidewalk. Jasmine stood now, adrenaline flooding her limbs with purpose. This was beyond the travel logs, beyond the smirks from Rep. Steele, beyond White House denials that danced around adjectives like reckless. This was foreign surveillance, seeing what America refused to acknowledge. This attaché didn't send this to Langley, she said. They sent it to me. Why? Lionel looked up slowly. Because they trust you'll do something with it. And that was the terrifying truth. The weight of global confidence resting not on agencies, not on institutions, but on one woman with a locked drawer full of secrets no one wanted exposed. Jasmine placed the memo inside a separate folder, sealed it, and slid it into her secure cabinet. Her fingers lingered on the latch. She had always assumed the greatest danger came from outside the walls, from cyber threats, foreign actors, unknown faces. But now she knew better. If European intelligence saw it from 1,000 miles away, what exactly did our own government choose to ignore up close? And who decided silence was safer than sovereignty? The knock on the side door was soft, 3 short raps like a secret trying not to be heard. Senator Travis Mendel looked up from his stack of red folders, furrowed brow smoothing only slightly when he saw Jasmine Crockett step through the narrow frame. No cameras, no aides, no briefing room press. Just 2 chairs, a sealed window, and the weight of knowing what crossed this threshold could shatter more than protocol. Jasmine didn't sit immediately. She placed the leather folder on the table like a detonator, calm but deadly. Her eyes said everything her words hadn't yet dared to. Mendel exhaled and gestured to the seat across from him. You realize what you're doing, right? Jasmine nodded once, slow and deliberate. I realize no one else did it first. She opened the folder and slid out a stack of documents, log trails, metadata, European attaché memos, the Geneva tariffs aligned with Petrovich's travel windows. She didn't speak as he read. She didn't flinch when he paused at the word Interpol. She just watched, like someone used to disbelief and ready to break through it. The minutes stretched thin, drawn like thread over glass. When he finally looked up, his eyes had changed, not with doubt, but with calculation. If even half of this holds under scrutiny, he began. It all holds, Jasmine, said voice firm. Every date, every entry, none of it's circumstantial. They're not just coincidences. They're decisions. Mendel leaned back, fingers steepled the fluorescent light above, casting hard shadows across the room. This goes beyond your jurisdiction, you know that. Executive protection, foreign surveillance, ethics violations. Title 50 doesn't shield you from political backlash. I don't want a shield, she snapped. I want eyes on the truth before it disappears again. There was a long pause. Then Mendel spoke, his voice quieter, not gentler. You'll be alone in this, Crockett. When this hits the wire, they'll call you paranoid, unstable, reckless. The party won't defend you. And if the media takes the bait, you'll be a headline for a week and a footnote by the midterms. She met his gaze without blinking. If I wanted applause, I would have leaked it. I brought it here because I still believe something sacred lives in oversight, even if it's just barely breathing. He stared at her, something unspoken between them, a mutual understanding of what happens when power gets too close to silence. Then slowly he nodded. I'll look deeper, he said. No promises. But I'll read every page. Just don't expect allies when the knives come out. I don't need allies, Jasmine replied. I need truth with a pulse. As she gathered her folder, Mendel's voice followed her to the door, low and steady. If this thing is real, you just became more dangerous than the man in those logs. Jasmine didn't stop. She opened the door, stepped back into the dim hallway, and left behind the one room in Washington where secrets could either find light or be buried for good. Now the question was no longer whether they believed her, but whether they had the courage to act before someone made sure they couldn't. It arrived at 2:14 a.m., a private signal ping marked urgent eyes only. No sender ID, no header, text. Just a single video file time-stamped but stripped of location metadata. Jasmine stared at the screen in her darkened office, the Capitol lights outside faint through drawn blinds. The file was small, no sound, low resolution, but it didn't need to speak. The image inside screamed. A fixed-angle surveillance camera mounted high in a stone corridor, likely underground. The setting was unmistakably European arched ceilings, vaulted sconces, walls weathered by time and secrets. Then came the movement. A tall man entered first, his gait, precise face partially obscured by shadow, but his silhouette was impossible to miss. Dragan Petrovich, and 5 seconds later the second figure stepped into frame. Slim, coated in a cream cashmere trench, hair pulled tight, sunglasses at night. But the profile, delicate jawline, the distinct half-turn at the door was unmistakable. Melania Trump. They walked in tandem, not hurried, not cautious, familiar. Jasmine froze the frame mid-step. Her heart didn't race, it narrowed. She leaned in, fingers tightening around the mouse. A single bead of sweat traced her spine. She knew what this was. She also knew what it wasn't. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't redacted. This was proof. She forwarded it to Rufus, immediately tagging it with 3 levels of encryption and 1 sentence: authenticate the original source and timestamp now. Then she sat back alone with the weight of something irreversible. By sunrise, Rufus confirmed what she already suspected. Facial recognition came back at 98.6% confidence. Camera registration matched the North Service corridor beneath the Kromazova Gallery, a private auction house in Prague, known for its invite-only shadow sales. Date October 17th. Time 21:46. Same day, Melania's official calendar listed her attending a youth arts diplomacy event with no cameras allowed. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence in the room now echoed like thunder. Lionel burst in with a tablet in hand. "It's spreading," he said. "Someone leaked it to a Czech journalist. She posted the stills before they could be taken down. Hashtags already trending. Hashtag auction ghost." On screen, the frozen image of Petrovich and Melania passing beneath a carved arch, her head tilted slightly toward his. Nothing romantic, nothing salacious, but deeply intimate in what it implied. Proximity, intent, pattern, and now, exposure. Jasmine closed the tablet and stood slow and deliberate. "They won't be able to deny this. They won't try," Lionel replied. "They'll discredit the footage attack, the timings say it was manipulated. But they won't say it's fake. Not outright. Because it's not," Jasmine said. The ripple had begun. Cable news anchors whispered around it. Former diplomats refused comment. The White House canceled all East Wing media appearances for the day. But the image remained grainy, imperfect, and louder than any statement. It didn't need clarity. It needed eyes. And it had millions. Now came the question no one in power wanted to answer. What happens when the whole country sees the lie and recognizes the face standing inside it? By 9:15 a.m., the footage had metastasized. It wasn't a story anymore. It was a bloodstream infection pulsing through every major network talk show, podcast, and burner account with a signal. News anchors leaned into carefully worded disclaimers. Unconfirmed surveillance footage. Alleged private meeting. But the image needed no confirmation. Melania, Petrovich. One frame side by side, walking into a place meant to be hidden. The questions didn't ask permission, they detonated. Inside the Capitol, Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't need to. While cameras circled the building and staffers whispered her name in the kind of tone usually reserved for whistleblowers or martyrs, she sat in her office calm as a storm's eye. Her inbox was flooding, cable bookers, op-ed, writers, senior correspondents offering sanitized interviews with room to clarify your position. She declined them all. The story wasn't hers to embellish. It was theirs to explain. Across the street, the White House began to unravel in real time. Internal comms shut down by noon East Wing access codes, scrambled personal devices confiscated from junior aides, Two escorted out under the pretense of routine personnel review. But Jasmine knew what a purge looked like. It wasn't cleanup. It was containment. They're not worried about the footage, Lionel said, pacing behind her. They're worried it confirms everything you already said. No one from the West Wing gave a denial. Instead, the president's legal counsel held a dry press briefing where each sentence was a masterclass in evasion. We urge caution against speculative narratives built on incomplete visuals. The First Lady's dedication to diplomacy has been steadfast. Any claims beyond official records are deeply irresponsible. Not once did they say it wasn't her. Not once did they say it wasn't him. They didn't even try. Jasmine read their statement aloud, each syllable slower than the last, as if peeling paint off a wall to expose rot beneath. They're buying time, she muttered, trying to see if this dies in 48 hours. But it wouldn't. The footage had taken root not just in the media, but in the architecture of doubt. Staffers from the ethics committee suddenly stopped replying. A friend in oversight forwarded her a classified briefing title with her name marked as a risk vector. The White House wasn't just distancing, they were building a perimeter. They're moving against you, Lionel said flatly. Jasmine didn't blink. If they're this desperate to shut it down, she whispered, then someone on the inside helped keep it alive. And the real question now wasn't who leaked the footage, but who inside the machine was feeding it oxygen and why Jasmine was next in their crosshairs. The flash drive came in a plain white envelope. No return address, no fingerprints, no markings, just wait. Jasmine found it waiting on her desk at 6:11 a.m., slid beneath the crack in the door sometime after security changed shifts. It didn't hum with urgency. It didn't threaten. It just sat there quiet, patient, knowing. She held it between two fingers like it might ignite. Inside the secure room, Jasmine powered up the isolated terminal, inserted the drive, and clicked the single file inside 23 seconds. .wav. No metadata, no source log. Just one cold recording. The static cleared fast the room on the other end, echoing slightly stone walls likely foreign. Then his voice. Petrovich. Measured, smooth, every syllable calculated. She doesn't know what she's giving me, he said in a low rasp. I smile, she opens doors. I mention art, she tells me schedules. She believes it's personal. That's why it works. That was it. 23 seconds. Not one syllable more. Jasmine stared at the screen, breath shallow, the silence afterward louder than any outburst could have been. Not blackmail, not coercion, willing access. And she, Melania Trump, was the conduit, the doorway, the disguise. She pressed pause. The exhaustion hit her like a slow collapse. It wasn't physical, it was moral. The weight of truth that could detonate a career, fracture institutions, maybe even tilt global diplomacy off its axis. She didn't tremble, but her shoulders, square and strong, for weeks finally dropped a fraction. No one was going to protect her if she pushed this forward. Not her party, not the press, not the system she'd sworn to serve. But she also knew what would happen if she didn't. By 7:03 a.m., she had written the memo, brief, surgical, encrypted. She attached the audio, flagged it for immediate congressional review, and marked a secondary timestamp for public release if redacted or suppressed. The subject line was simple: national security exposure. Level red. Public trust contingency authorized. Before she hit send, she stared at the message one last time. She wasn't naive. This could be the end, not of the case, but of her. Then she clicked. It was done. If they tried to bury it, they'd have to bury the people's trust along with it. And the only question that remained, one that echoed louder than Petrovich's voice, was whether truth still had value, when telling it could cost everything. Jasmine entered the chamber with nothing but a thin navy folder tucked under her arm and the weight of a nation on her spine. The Intelligence Committee sat stiff-backed, unreadable. The Ethics Committee beside them, faces drawn like parchment, watching her like she carried fire. No cameras, no press, just sealed doors and history waiting. She placed the packet on the table, slid it forward, and said clearly, "You now have everything, unredacted." Inside were timestamps, trip logs, foreign memos, the Prague footage, and a printed transcript of the 23-second wiretap. No commentary, no narrative. She wasn't here to persuade, only to present. Her voice never wavered, but her fingers tightened behind her back, as if bracing for an invisible blow. She didn't seek approval, only acknowledgement of fact. There was no applause, no outrage, no swift judgment, just a long, hollow silence that swallowed the oxygen in the room. Senator Mendel shifted first, clearing his throat without speaking. One committee member closed the folder, not meeting her eyes. Another jotted something that looked like a prayer. Then Jasmine turned, walked out, and left the truth sitting on a table of men who measured loyalty in increments. Outside, the world was shifting, just not officially. The White House released nothing. No comment, no tweet, no lawyer. But the walls were talking. Former ambassadors were canceling appearances. Intelligence analysts refused interviews. Aide chatter leaked through bathroom walls and locked elevators. The silence wasn't void, it was volume. Jasmine returned to her office with no illusions. She wasn't the hero in anyone's story, just the woman who refused to let this one go. Lionel handed her a list of anonymous Hill staffers who had sent her thank you notes without signatures. That was all the recognition she got, and maybe all she needed. Her phone vibrated with a single message from Rufus. They blinked. One of the memos was just quietly added to the Senate Oversight Archive. No headlines, no press conference. But the ground had shifted a degree. She looked out the window, Capitol lights flickering like distant stars. When institutions choose silence over confrontation, what does justice look like, and who decides if that silence is strategy or surrender? It didn't explode. It echoed. The story bled into the bloodstream of America, not through headlines, but through murmurs. Small-town radio hosts asked cautious questions in morning monologues. Independent podcasts dissected timestamps, compared trade shifts with travel logs. Retired agents spoke off record. Petrovich's name became a ghost in government halls, never mentioned, but felt like a chill behind every closed door. Jasmine refused the circuit. No Sunday panels. No memoir quotes. She turned down every exclusive and instead funneled her momentum into late-night sessions with policy staffers, rewriting oversight procedures, drafting accountability amendments, pushing quiet reform through the side doors, while the main ones stayed locked. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing repair. In the Capitol, a few unexpected bills passed, tight clauses tucked into broader acts. Tighter audit trails for diplomatic travel. Confidentiality reforms for East Wing visitors. The name Petrovich never appeared in print, but Interpol flagged him silently. He disappeared off radars, no arrest, no extradition, just gone. That absence said everything. Publicly, no institution admitted fault. But something broke, and the cracks didn't close. Aides who once avoided her in the cafeteria now nodded in quiet respect. A Virginia congressman, once dismissive, asked for her input on digital ethics. In Arkansas, a group of teachers hosted a community forum called Truth and the Cost of Silence, inspired by her hearing transcripts. It wasn't a movement, not yet, but it was motion. Jasmine stood on the edge of it all, not in the spotlight but in the wiring. Watching, listening, still filing bills while the country adjusted to a truth it never officially received. This wasn't revolution. It was erosion of denial, of pretense, of the illusion that no one inside could ever speak out and survive. And maybe the real question now wasn't whether the truth had changed the world, but whether quiet change could still shift the culture that protects power. Melania vanished from the public eye like fog in morning heat. No statement, no denial, not even a carefully worded deflection from her team. Her schedule, once precise to the minute, emptied overnight. Gala appearances canceled. Diplomatic luncheons quietly reassigned. The First Lady of Mystery had become the first absence. News cycles moved on as they always do, but the silence she left behind wasn't quiet, it gnawed. Without confession or confrontation, there was no resolution, only residue. Jasmine felt it every time she passed through Capitol metal detectors or reviewed a new policy draft. The weight wasn't just political, it was moral. Closure, she learned, is a myth power tells itself. She stood in her office late one night, city lights blurred through double glass, and stared at the last memo she'd sent. It hadn't ended anything, but it had opened something, space for questioning, for documentation, for memory to live, even if accountability didn't. The absence of outrage wasn't failure. It was the beginning of a long discomfort that couldn't be unlearned. This was never about scandal, not really. It was about the architecture of secrecy, the scaffolding of silence that held institutions together through a mission. And Jasmine had pierced it even if she couldn't dismantle it. She didn't expect vindication anymore, just continuity. And maybe that was enough, because in a system that swallows voices, she had spoken not to win, but to record. And the question that now loomed wasn't whether the truth would echo, but whether the machine could keep running unchanged after someone like Jasmine dared to ask what it was hiding. Jasmine sat alone in her dimly lit office, the walls lined with case files and unanswered letters, each one a quiet ledger of the weeks behind her. The city outside pulsed with normalcy, cars, conversation, clipped heels on marble, but inside the cost settled heavy on her bones. Her name no longer floated through backroom conversations with ease. Colleagues had grown polite but distant. Invitations vanished. Even allies turned cautious when the subject turned to what she uncovered. Security briefings came more frequently now. Unmarked packages, threat assessments. Her phone flagged twice by foreign IPs. Her father had stopped watching her on C-SPAN, said it made him anxious. She hadn't argued. But through the fatigue, through the loneliness, there remained something hard, warm, and unshakable beneath the ache. She had not lied. She had not backed away. Some nights she sat with the audio still loaded on her secure server, just staring at the waveform, 23 seconds of betrayal, power, and complicity. That small clip had changed her world, but it hadn't destroyed her. What frayed most wasn't her credibility, but her illusions. She now understood rot begins not with a crime, but with the moment no one asks why it happened. She had asked, and she would again. Not for drama, not for glory, but because the system needed someone to feel the tremors when silence grew too loud. She wrote in her journal that night, not for the record, but for herself. When you lose comfort, gain clarity. When you lose friends, find principle. And when they say you're alone, make sure you're standing in truth. Then she closed the book, placed it in the drawer, and locked it without flinching. And in that stillness, she asked herself not what truths she had told, but how many more were waiting untouched in the quiet hallways of power, never questioned, never named, never risked. It didn't come with fireworks, no press conference, no podium draped in flags. But in the folds of subcommittee notes and late-night amendments, Jasmine's fingerprints began to appear. A quiet bill on executive travel log audits passed with little fanfare. Another, tucked into a fiscal oversight package, mandated quarterly disclosures of unofficial foreign contacts by White House aides. They weren't headline victories, but they were change. Her colleagues, once hesitant to be seen beside her, now borrowed phrases she coined in closed-door hearings. Words like duty to disclose and precautionary transparency slipped into committee drafts. Procedural reforms followed small, deliberate rewrites of how committees handled ethics alerts and classified memos. The system hadn't turned, but it had shifted ever so slightly because someone had forced it to blink. Jasmine watched it happen without needing her name attached. She declined credit, declined interviews. Leadership, she believed, was less about who lit the fire and more about who stayed when the flames went out. She showed up to votes early, stayed late for markups, and offered edits not for glory, but for durability. She wasn't chasing justice like a headline. She was building it like scaffolding. And still she walked Capitol Hill with her back straight and her silence purposeful, not silence of surrender, but of strength. She knew spectacle burned fast, but scrutiny stayed. What grew next wasn't a movement, it was a standard. A staffer who once mocked her bill now called her to ask about clause wording. A senator who never returned her calls now asked for input on ethics triggers. The culture, so long insulated by unspoken rules and selective blindness, had absorbed a new reflex check twice. And the question lingered like a shadow on marble steps, if one voice armed with truth and resolve could plant the roots of change. What could many voices do if they chose scrutiny over silence? The morning Jasmine left Washington, the sky was overcast, but the city was loud traffic, ambition meetings stacked behind closed doors. She walked past the Capitol one last time, not in shame, not in defeat, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had not flinched. Her resignation hadn't come with scandal or spectacle. It came with choice. She had stayed long enough to plant something that might outlive her title. In her final letter to constituents, there was no bitterness, only clarity. Silence is not neutrality, she wrote. It is often permission. She didn't name names. She didn't recount battles. Instead, she thanked those who stood beside her, when truth felt like a liability. She left not because the system broke her, but because she refused to be reshaped by it. Legacy wasn't a marble bust or a book deal. It was a ripple and unredacted sentence in a hearing transcript, a line added to a travel audit clause, a staffer pausing before deleting an internal memo. It was the moment someone in power decades from now would think twice, not because they feared being caught, but because someone like Jasmine had once made honesty feel possible. The risk she took didn't end the silence, but it disturbed it, and that disturbance had force. As the car pulled away from Union Station, she glanced back only once, not at the buildings, but at the space between them. That invisible space where accountability either breathes or suffocates. She had fought to keep it open. And now, as her story retreats from headlines into memory, one question remains, not for the halls of power, but for the people watching from outside. When you see the imbalance between power and truth, will you speak or will you stay silent? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.